So on that first hose that leads into the vacuum pump, we'll back flush it from the painted line up at that first solenoid. And then if you have it, some compressed air through there would be ideal. So we'll get a little air wand and we'll blow a little air through there, make sure all that brake cleaner is out of there. Otherwise, we can keep cleaning the rest of these lines. So for the most part, we are pretty sure that there's not much coolant throughout this system. I feel like we caught it at a pretty good time. All of our solenoids are operational. We've already replaced the turbo, so we're not too worried about the wastegate actuator having any coolant in there as well. And we've cleaned the main line that does send some coolant through there, ensured that that was clear. And I guess we're ready to put everything back together. So I'm gonna put these solenoids back in the same place that we had them, ensuring that we have the vacuum system hooked up correctly. And we'll get ready to put that water pump, thermostat, and changeover valve back together. We'll go ahead and put these connections back together under the manifold, as well as the solenoid down here. There is one additional thing I do want to talk about, and that is the secondary thermostat seal. That seal is installed inside of the actual block, and it is about an inch inside of the housing here. It is kind of an inspect when worn, as there are specific tools needed to remove and install that. So we'll take a quick look at the seal, make sure that the actual seal surface is not damaged or deformed, cracked, or anything like that. And we'll say that that's pretty much okay. It's not going to leak externally, but there is potential that you could have some coolant faults if that seal is damaged. And again, reinstalling it, you could damage it installing. So I've personally replaced these thermostats without doing that seal, but we've seen issues where that seal can be damaged and cause issues. So take that for what it's worth. And we're going to keep going with this one, making sure the inside of this seal is in good shape. It's not detached from the main frame on the metal outer ring, and it is not warped or damaged. So when this sits inside of there, that seal on the inside should be pointed towards the block to accept your thermostat. There's obviously a lot of dirt and debris and oil caked up in this area. So once I get that cleared up, I'm actually gonna wad some paper towels in here and hit everything with some brake cleaner before we put all those new parts in there. As you can see, there's a lot of oil and coolant in these threads here, so we want to make sure those are clean and clear. And if you have the old bolts, you could certainly clean them off and use the old M6x10 bolt. But we are fortunate and we have a little thread chaser. So we're going to go in there, make sure we remove any debris, anything that's going to be caked up in there, and that'll pull all that out and make sure that we can get these bolts installed without any resistance. As you can see, there's definitely some debris in there, but there's a lot of crap caked up in there, so let's go ahead and kind of soak everything down, make sure we have no issues later on and we can see any coolant leaks that we may have in the future. Now we've got everything cleaned up, we'll go ahead and remove our wadding here, get ready to start cleaning up these surfaces. Take a little piece of Scotch-Brite pad, Brillo pad, and rip off a little corner so I can get into some of these smaller areas and just clear up the sealing surface. You don't have to go crazy. Make sure there's no high spots. There's definitely going to be some staining from that weird zigzag gasket that was removed. You don't need to go insane on it. It will probably still remain. Make sure that these bores where the O-rings go around the pipes are nice and clear, free of any old rubber that may have got stuck. See, but get a good look in there. Make sure it's cleared out. Same thing here. There's not a seal on the surface here. It's on the ridge on the outside. So just make sure there's nothing really obstructing the thermostat from being installed, and that should be okay there. This one does have a seal on the surface on the bottom smaller bore. The top one is sealed by an O-ring that is inserted into the bore, so make sure the bore is clear on this one and the surface is clear on this one. Again, I'm not being extremely abrasive, I'm just gently clearing the surface to ensure that there's nothing that will obstruct our new gasket. Everything looks fairly clean. We're gonna go ahead and grab a little of the coolant from the thermostat housing where there's still some sitting there. And I'm just gonna run that around the O-ring that's gonna be sitting in that upper bore for this changeover valve. Get it on there pretty liberally, and wouldn't be a bad idea while you're in here to put a little bit in here as well to get that seal on that crossover pipe installed easily later on. I'm gonna fit this in that upper bore. It may take a little bit of wiggling. Careful that you don't pinch that vacuum line that's right over top of it. and then it should fall right into place, and we'll grab a couple of new bolts and put them right back in there. If you recall from when we removed this, these were a little tricky to get out, specifically the one on the bottom left corner here. So I've got the T30 on a magnet, and I'm going to insert it in here, give it a little spin to get it started. Do the same for the opposing one down here that was a little bit hidden. I have to kind of feel around for it. The bottom right one is a little bit easier to see and get to. One more up top. We'll have to move that vacuum line out of the way to get to. Now that we have all the bolts fitted, we'll go back and torque them all to about 9 Newton meters. These are not required replacement, but with how much coolant was leaking in this area, it's certainly nice. I actually may have to use that longer one. It is certainly nice to have some new hardware. Make sure that this all bites and stays tight. I'm going to tighten these up in a crisscross pattern. Next up, we have the thermostat, and as we discussed, that seal is going to stay in there, and we're going to just replace the thermostat along with some new hardware. We can put a little bit of coolant on this ring here. As I mentioned, it doesn't seal on the face, it seals by this O-ring being inserted into that bore. So just like the changeover valve, I'll put a little bit here, a little bit on there as well to help us guide into that seal. Go ahead and put this in place. Same thing, make sure that this vacuum line is out of the way. This connector, if you recall, was upside down towards the bottom, so we are going to put the connector towards the bottom of the engine. Make sure this harness is pushed out of the way. You don't want to pinch that in the thermostat either. Give it a little push in from that O-ring. It might be a little bit resistant, but it will find its home. You do have a little bit of manipulation to get those bolt holes to line up, so make sure that you can see the threads clearly before you go ahead and put those bolts in there. Now we'll go back and torque those to 9 Newton meters as well with a T30. Now that all 3 of those are tightened up, take a good look at that connector. There's a little coolant in there, so I am going to blow that out with some compressed air just to make sure that we do have a fighting chance at not having any coolant in that in the future. That looks pretty good. The changeover valve does go to this vacuum line here. Get that snugged up on the changeover valve. Slide the solenoid back on. That's going to go around that. Connector is going to go upside down, push the lock in, and that one's taken care of there. If you recall, this did clip onto the thermostat on the side here. I'm actually going to put this under that harness. No, I'm not. I'm going to leave that just like that. This will clip up here, keeping everything tight. Looks like we have a broken little fastener there. It may have gone to that vacuum line, but with all this oil, everything got very brittle. I'll put a zip tie here to make sure that this line doesn't come down and out of the way. So I'll just snug that up together there. And just to reiterate, all that oil that we were cleaning off in this area and in this connector, all over this, may have been contributed to from the oil filter housing that we had replaced previously. We do have a full DIY on the replacement of that oil filter housing, but as you can see, that filter housing is extremely close to the water pump, thermostat, and this whole coolant system area. That's why there was all that caked up oil in this spot. The water pump, although it was leaking externally, and they are known for that, may have been contributed to by that oil leaking down the face of the water pump into that weep hole and causing some issues. Well, we did see some oil on the vacuum line and oil throughout. So I just wanted to touch on that real quick before we get too far back together, so I can mention the placement of the filter housing in conjunction with the coolant system. Now for our new updated 6-bolt water pump, we're going to put this in with one hand and hold it in place. There are no dowels or anything. However, we do want to make sure that this harness is kind of behind it without actually getting it pinched. I have a handful of bolts here like a dummy. I'll get one started there. I'll start another one down the corner. I'll get all these snugged up and we'll go back and torque them all to 9 Newton meters. There's another one in the bottom here you kind of have to feel around for. Last but not least, there's one underneath the flange here. It's a little tough to get to. Again, make sure that harness doesn't get caught underneath. So there is a rather specific sequence, and they number all these bolts 1 through 7. The first one that they want you to tighten is this one to 9 Newton meters, then this one to 9 Newton meters, then go back and do 1, 2 through 7 all the way around, and we'll go over which ones are 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 after these two. So we'll start on the top with a T30 on a torque wrench. That's 9. Go back down to this one, down by the coolant nipple. We're going to tighten this one to 9 as well. Now that those are fastened, let's double check this harness, make sure it's free, and then tuck that back behind that flange. Should be sufficient there. Don't forget your vacuum line here. Get that back on. New water pump. There we go. And now, before we go any further, we do have to put that crossover pipe to the changeover valve, as well as the crossover pipe to the cylinder head. So, although the entire pipe is not included in our kit, we do have the O-ring, as these are replaceable from Porsche. In Audi land, you have to buy the entire pipe. You can replace the O-ring and this, or the entire pipe through Porsche. However, as you can see, it has taken a toll on the seal on the end of this crossover pipe when that oil was leaking, starting to expand and distort that seal. I would normally make an attempt to remove the seal. However, in the past, you can start to distort the aluminum pipe because the new one actually is bonded by a steel ring on the outside, which is very difficult to remove. So my suggestion would be, if your seal starts to look like that from a potential oil leak above, you may want to purchase this entire pipe, which has both O-rings on it, and we'll have that linked in the description below. We'll go ahead and put a little coolant on the outsides of these to make sure they slide into place. And we're going to fit this end first and then get the other end into the bore down in here. Put a little coolant in there. We did have some here when we had that out. Into the changeover valve. You're going to kind of wiggle it into place. Once it goes far enough into the changeover valve, it should press into there, and the bolt hole will line up right there. So if you recall from the pile of T30s that we had, this is where the one shorter bolt and the one longer bolt come in. These could use a little cleaning up. They're not included in the kit as they're not part of those main components, but we can certainly reuse these. They're not torque to yield or one-time use. And just like that, they're good as new. So the shorter one is what's going to fasten the pipe to the water pump. Get that one in there, and then I may need the magnet for this one, as it is a little tough to get in there, but it should be lined up. There we go. And just like every other fastener so far, we'll torque that to 9 Newton meters with the T30. And just like the other surfaces, we do have that one flange down there that's going to need a little cleaning up. So we'll take our Brillo pad, just clean the sealing surface on the outside. And we don't have to worry about the other end of that because it's brand new and the new water pump. I'll go ahead and use our thread chaser. That bottom thread doesn't look exactly clean and clear. It's a little tight in here with this harness in our way. Make sure these are cleared out. Now that we're getting ready to put this back in, we do want to put some new O-rings on this, but I do want to make mention, in the kit that we have, this seal is slightly different. It has superseded to a new part number, which does look rather different. However, it will fit the same. The old one does have 3 little ribs on the inside, where the new one has about 6 ribs surrounding it. So remove the old gasket with a pick, clean and clear this up, get ready to install the new gasket. There's a little coolant still in there. If there's any rubber still stuck in there, just take it out with a pick, clear anything out. Get ready to press the new seal in. Just kind of work it around, making sure it's evenly pressed in. And you can see already that it is protruding out from this flange where the other one was sandwiched flat. And the upper one here, we know that this was really stuck in there. I did have to use a screwdriver to push it out. It is rather expanded, and again, that was from that oil filter housing that was leaking right onto that O-ring, as well as that crossover pipe that we just replaced. But this one is substantially worn out in comparison to the new one. So we'll give this a little clean up, dirt and debris on the outside of it. All right, that looks a little better. Go ahead and roll the new O-ring over. You can see it's already starting to fit much more snug, and we'll go ahead and put a little coolant on that as well. And this one should be installed dry. Just rub a little coolant around that O-ring. Remember, from removal, this harness was kind of out this way. So we'll get it positioned in both flanges, and we'll be working the one into the water pump first. Again, make sure the harness behind that is free from being pinched. You don't want to create any new faults after trying to repair one. I'll try to get around this harness and fit this one in here. It might be easier if you're using the actual T30 bit. Hand barely fits in there. Again, this one's going to be a little tough. Going in blind. We'll continue snugging those down. Make sure this bottom one does not go in crooked. I've already had to refit it once. Started to go a little sideways. That's why we're doing it all by hand. So we'll go ahead and put the harness back on the dipstick there. That vacuum line was tucked behind the vacuum pump there. Just give everything a good once over. Make sure everything is routed as it was. And I think we're all good. I just do want to make mention that at this time, you certainly could refit the upper radiator support, just sliding it back in place, reattaching the upper and lower radiator hoses, and performing a pressure test on the cooling system. It would definitely be wise at this point to ensure that everything is sealed before getting the entire car completed and not exactly being able to pinpoint any leaks if you have them. I've done this a couple of times. I'm fairly confident we got this all nailed down. So I'm going to continue on with the water pump pulley, and we'll get this thing wrapped up. Now we'll be taking the new 6-bolt updated water pump pulley and the 6 pieces of hardware with the thread locker and installing that on the pump. It might be a little bit tough to see exactly where the holes for them are, but once you get them lined up, we'll just hand tighten a couple of these. Once you get one started, the rest should fall right into place. With the new pulley installed and all the new hardware, I'm going to be using a 4mm Allen key in one of the holes of the pulley, kind of in the 3 o'clock position. And go a little higher there until it locks in place right about there, so that when you turn the pulley clockwise, the Allen actually keeps it in place. You don't want to do it on the bottom here because it could run into that barb, but you will want to keep a hand on it to make sure that you keep constant pressure on that. We're going to set our torque wrench to 5 Newton meters to start, and then we're going to go 60 degrees on all 6 bolts. All right, once these are all snugged up to 5 Newton meters, so I'm just going to put a dot on the washer and the bolt so that I know which ones have had an angle applied. Now the 4mm Allen did work pretty well for the 5 Newton meter torque, but trying to do the angle on these, we did find that putting this screwdriver in here and wedging it into the water pump in behind is going to be the best course of action. So we need to do 60 degrees. Well, getting a better look at that lower idler, it is really starting to have some grooves in that idler from the belt and all that oil leaking out. So I think I might go ahead and replace that one as well. These ones are much smoother. They don't have a large ridge on the outside. The bearing seems to be fairly stout and not loose, so I'm not too concerned with those. And those were not in the path of oil, which has obviously been coming down this area. And once we have that pulley off, we can also take some time to clean some of that debris up there as well. Next, we'll be taking off this pulley. As you can see, it's got some lines from the belt where it has wear in. I'm going to use a screwdriver and pop this cap off. Once you get the cap off of that, there is a 10mm triple square in the center. New pulley out. There's a little debris behind it. Give it a quick spritz with some brake cleaner. Now we have our new pulley. We'll go ahead and thread that into place before torquing that 10mm triple square to 25 Newton meters. Once we've torqued that to 25 Newton meters, we can take the cap that we pried off of that and press it back into place. Should get an audible click. Next up, we're going to be putting the tensioner back on. There is a little triangle on the back of here that does allow this to rest against the side of the bracket down below. So make sure that that does not sit in a way that it obstructs it from sitting flush. But once this is installed, we will be moving this eccentric to tension this. So it will sit like this, and then it will sit like that. So keep that in mind as we're going to install that. So snug it up and then back it up a turn. It should stop against the bracket to the right, and it should rotate to clockwise direction to loosen and counterclockwise to tighten. We'll put the tensioner in the upright position. That way it'll give us plenty of room to get the belt routed back on, and we'll proceed on to the other belt once we get that one tensioned up. On this particular vehicle, if you recall, we do have two different size belts, one small one and one large one. This is the main belt that will go on afterwards. We're going to start with the small one. Start around the crank pulley, getting it tucked around there nicely. And it will go under the top tensioner and under the bottom roller and around the AC compressor. Make sure it's catching all the ribs. Now we'll go ahead with a T55 on one ratchet and a 13mm on the torque wrench and set the tensioner at that 6 o'clock position. Once you get that down in that direction, you can remove the ratchet. It will be resting against that point that we were talking about on the bracket, and now we can torque this down to 25 Newton meters as well with a 13mm. And just like the other roller, we're going to take the larger cover and put that back over that 13 that we just torqued to 25 Newton meters. Just like the other one, ensure you get an audible click, and then that belt is routed. Now I'll go ahead and put a new belt on the main belt drive. We're going to be reusing the rollers and tensioners because they are still in decent shape. We're going to start on the crank pulley just like we did. Go up over the water pump. Once you get these started, this is going to be a little bit more difficult than the other one. Take a 16mm and we will pull the tensioner, move the tensioner this way until it stops. Get the belt around the alternator and then around the idler. And while you still have everything tensioned, make sure the belt is all around the pulley in the correct grooves and release your tensioner. Everything looks good there. It's all inside the grooves. Nice, nice. Now at this point, we're ready to start putting the lock carrier back together. I'm gonna pop the 2 coolant hoses on, and before we get too far carried away, then I'll go ahead and vacuum check the coolant system before fully reassembling the vehicle. First course of action before fully reassembling the lock carrier is getting that lower radiator hose, the one that was a cross pipe across the bottom that goes to the auxiliary radiator. It does rest on some dowels built into the lock carrier, so it will line up with those holes fairly easily. And they are going into plastic, so they may be a little bit resistant. Snug these up with a T30, probably about 3.5 Newton meters if you really want to torque them, but just be careful as you go too much and it will strip the plastic. And once those are back in place, you may recall when we were pulling this out, there was a hose right below the frame rail on this side. And we just need to get that snuck back into this bracket here. That secured. Come back over and get this lower radiator hose that's still dripping taken care of, as well as the lower radiator fan connector. Before we connect these hoses, do take a second and get a good look at the inside of these lower hoses to make sure those seals on the hoses aren't damaged or ruptured. These are usually fairly stout and can be easily reused. Quite simply, just kind of work it back on until that clip re-engages. And I did take the clip out of the upper one. It was a little easier to get out. If you did take the clips out, now's the time to go ahead and put them back in. Same thing we did on the bottom. Make sure the seal is in good shape. Reinstall your clip. You may need to pitch the radiator slightly back towards the vehicle. Get this upper hose to engage, and you'll get an audible click just like so. And then again, be very careful with these plastic hoses as well as the adapter on the radiator. They are fragile, they are weak. This one was only about 7 years old at this time and it was already damaged. So if your vehicle is any older, definitely consider replacing some or all of the hoses in this area. Make sure that clip is re-engaged. Position the radiator, give it a good couple of tugs to make sure that's still sitting there. And we still got to get the radiator connector taken care of down here. The connector plugged in, audibly click in place. I know you guys can't see this. Engage the red lock, and then I'll try to share this one. Make sure you get the red lock facing downward, and it should slide back into that bracket and click into place. Now we've got some additional harnesses that we pulled off to give ourselves a little more slack, as well as the hood cable that we had detached from up here. So we'll start this cluster of wiring here. This was the one for the bumper. Here's your headlight, airbag, hood latch, high pressure sensor, and so we can start with that one. This one does go into this connection here, into the horn, make sure it clicks. This will lead up into the backside of here. There will be the connector for the hood latch, airbag connector directly below that, right about here. Nice. This one did come through this area here, so we will route this back up this way. There is a little spot for it to attach right here, where this will attach to the back of the radiator support, right next to the latch. Coming through here, catches itself in there and clicks into place right there. That takes care of all the wiring that we're gonna have to deal with on this side, aside from the bumper and the headlight here. Come over here, and we only have a couple of connectors to take care of. Hood latch, airbag, temperature sensor, another horn. Starting with the airbag, if you recall, this one was upside down from previous. Push the body of the connector, then the red lock. The hood latch will follow suit there. And then this one will fall down the frame rail here. This connection here will lead into the horns. That will make this connector mate up there. We have this one going into the radiator, side of the radiator temperature sensor here. Once we've got all that situated, there is this one extra connector that will not go into anything until you get that front crash bar back on the car, and that will go into the ambient air temp sensor. So we'll circle back to that one. We'll leave this one hanging so we don't forget it. And now that we have the cooling system refitted, let's go ahead and slide the lock carrier back into place. I'll fit 2 of the T30s here just to hold it there while we're refilling the cooling system. And we'll make sure that nothing's leaking before we put the entire front clip back together. So I'm just lightly putting these T30s back in here, keeping any stress off of those fragile coolant lines. But you certainly could have reattached everything while leaving it loose and still having the ability to slide it out, checking for any leaks. However, with that pulley on there, we're not going to see too much if we did any mistakes, but I'm fairly confident we're good. So let me go grab our coolant filler and we'll apply some vacuum and see if this thing's holding. Now I've got a 5-gallon pail filled with about 1 gallon of our coolant, another gallon of distilled water. I'm going to put this a little bit higher than the vehicle, or at least higher than the reservoir. I'm going to hook the air line up to our device, put the other end in the bucket. We have the fitting open here. I'm going to prime this until I can get some coolant up here. That there. Close that off once you see no air bubbles in here. And grab a rag because I just put coolant in that line and it's going to make a mess. Now keep an eye on the gauge, and we're going to draw a vacuum on the system to ensure that everything is sealed. And once that holds for at least 5 minutes or so in the green on the gauge, we know that the vehicle is actually holding vacuum, and we can proceed with reinstalling the rest of the front end. And that should be good enough. It's about 22, 26 inches of mercury or so. Really, you just want to ensure that you're holding enough vacuum. If that starts to drop slowly as you're applying vacuum, you may have rolled one of the O-rings or one of the harnesses maybe pinched under the fitting, but this is a good thing to do before you get it all back together and be able to go back in and check any leaks. But we're holding here, so we'll let it sit like this for about 5 minutes or so, and we'll come back in a second and start filling the cooling system. Once you've ensured you have no coolant leaks and we are holding vacuum, we're ready to go ahead and fill the cooling system back up. Make sure your hose is submerged in the coolant solution. Go ahead and crack the line and keep an eye on your bucket to make sure that it does not drop below the hose here before you're actually done filling the system. You can modulate how fast it flows by just opening that a little more. You just want to make sure that you don't introduce any air in here while you're doing this, otherwise you'll have to drain and fill the system because you could potentially introduce an air bubble somewhere throughout the system. Looks like we are just about back down to 0. We've got a smidge of coolant left in the bucket. We'll let this balance out a little bit more. Now, this is your dipstick more or less, and that is going to modulate the coolant level for you, letting you know if you have coolant in there or not. So we're going to want to bring that down a little bit because this should be sitting at the minimum mark. So we have a little too much coolant. I need this to come down to about just visible in the top of the coolant reservoir. So I'll take this out and extract a little bit of coolant out. All right, so with the CTA 7073, I'll take a little bit of coolant out. So I'll definitely go back and double check. I've extracted quite a bit out, but it is right at the point where it begins to float. Once you've sucked out enough coolant, you'll notice the minimum mark is right on the back of the coolant reservoir here, but the float in the middle does need to stay floating right flush at the top of the reservoir. So once you've gone through and started the vehicle up and made sure you have no coolant leaks and let the vehicle cool down, it should rest right in that same position. You may need to top it off if there's any small air bubbles that have circulated after running the vehicle for the first time, but you do want it right around that area. So we'll go ahead and throw the cap back on, make sure it is tight, and you will have to make sure that it gets that final click into place. And then again, we will double check that once we warm the vehicle up and let it get back down to a cooler temperature. Now we'll go ahead and refit the front lock carrier support bolts. And use an impact gun real quick, and we're just going to pull up on the bumper, looking at the witness marks where the bolts used to be. I'll show you a little bit better on that side, but you're going to try to line it up with exactly where it was sitting before. Give it a little snug. Same thing over here. You'll see trace marks where the lock washer was pressed into the aluminum bracket, right back in that same spot. We can go ahead and remove these supports. Now we'll go back and torque those to 55 Newton meters. We'll be torquing these to 10 Newton meters with a T30 on top. All right, now that the lock carrier is resecured, you could certainly continue on with repair. I do want to mention that we did not hook up that silly little clip in the lock carrier. That's that little small clip that we pulled out here. So we do want to go back and get that before we put the headlight in or make it any more difficult for us up here. Quite simply, just press it back on place, making sure that that hood cable can stay up close up front. All right, let's go ahead and refit this charge pipe. Make sure that there's no debris or coolant or anything sitting in there from when we were working. So after you watch me struggle with this charge pipe, really make sure that that gasket stays in the outward position and does not roll on the inside of the charge pipe as you tighten it back up. We'll snug these up, make sure that it's fitted firmly, and we'll keep on going to the other side. Just like the other side, with a little bit less to go wrong. With a 7mm, we'll slide that on and snug this back up. Make sure that's on there firmly. After we've got the charge pipes fitted, next move is going to put the headlights back in. You do have to kind of tip them around a little bit. Be really careful on the fender here, keeping it ahead of the fender, not to scratch the body of the car or the headlight. Fit the shortest screw in the top of the headlight here. With the shortest screw holding the headlight in, the next two are the longer T30s in the back, as well as another one kind of hidden underneath here. The T30, we're gonna just run these in close. Keep keeping an eye on the body gaps of the headlight. And just like the other side, be really careful fitting this around the fender, getting that bracket behind there. Oh, connector. Make sure nothing is pinched underneath here. I'll take the shorter bolt and fit that up here. Longer T30 in the back. And then another long T30 up front. And one more bolt underneath the headlight, just like the other side. Now we'll go ahead and refit this bracket here, making sure that the radiator ducts are seated in there. This is going to kind of sit like that. Then we'll have a couple more T30s here to go back into these holes. Snug these up as well. And then the bottoms of this should line up right with the headlight brackets. Go ahead and drop these in just to get them started. Now we'll put the rebar back on the car. I did remove the plastic. It does have a little plastic rivet on there. If you still have yours on, it's going to be a little bit easier to install it without the foam in the front there. If you recall, these little spring things from the beginning of the video were a little bit annoying. We're going to get these behind. I'll have to get this in between these two as we kind of line it up. Using a screwdriver, pry these down and into place. That one, once we get that lined up, come back on this side. Bolts through. Go to the other side. Do the same thing over here. Then we had 4 13mm nuts to accompany those pieces of hardware. With a 13mm socket on the bottom and a 13, actually I'm going to do it the other way. Hold it up here. I'm going to be putting these T30s in the front here on either side. Double check those brackets in the back. And then the last connector is going to be this one here. However, I can't remember exactly where it clipped on. Oh, it clips on right about here. And on the outside of the rebar, push that on there. That'll keep that snug and tight from getting in any in the way of anything. So we're pretty much back at the point of ready to reinstall our front bumper. We could certainly go ahead and install our intake at this point as well. It was attached up here. However, let's keep going with the front bumper and we'll go to the intake at the very end when we get the car back down on the ground. Go ahead and stick this back on. If it's still intact, rivet there. It kind of just hooks around. Before we throw the bumper on, I'm going to put a little tape here as the corners of this bumper do kind of curve in a way that may be a little bit difficult to get either side fitted without scratching these fenders. Before we throw the bumper back on, we're going to put the auxiliary cooler cover back on. Slide it into place. Let's go ahead and refit this bumper. Careful on the fenders here. There we go. Make sure it slides up into the top of the radiator support. And then underneath the headlight. And it does have to kind of sit flush against the fender here. Pull back, a couple of taps. Make sure it sits flush. Pull your tape. Do the same thing on the other side. Unless your tape's underneath, then you're going to take it back off like me. And across the top, there are some coarse, large washer head T30s. And if you remember on the driver's side, we did have this one 8-pin connector with these 6 wires in there leading up into here. Then we'll go ahead and put these T30s back in the corners. Go, make sure the headlight's connected as well as the drain. And we can push our fender liner back into place. Also going to be the rivet on the inside of here. Inserted from the top and then pushed in. Now we'll get the rest of the T25s for all these screws here. Make sure it's fitted underneath the bumper. And there's a little plastic rivet that goes in there. Just like the other side, we'll start with the T30 that runs down the side here. A lot easier on this side. Double check the bumper fitment before tightening it up. Switch back to the T25. Same as before, make sure this is fitted under the bumper. We've got the headlight drain as well as the connector for the headlight. Make sure the lock is pulled out. Get that to click audibly. Lock the red tab in place. Put your drain on. And then we do have that rivet that goes in from the top. Once you get that seated, push that down. And then we're going to continue with the fender liner here. All T25 screws. Now that we've got the bumper almost all the way on, before we put that top panel on, we do have to reattach the front of the air inlet. So let's get our air box back in here. I'm just gonna make sure that there's no debris inside our inlet. Give it a little wipe. Make sure there's no coolant in there. Air filter on the turbo inlet. Go ahead, and obviously on the aftermarket intake we'll have a different size socket, but I believe there should still be a 7mm on the factory intake if I recall. And while we're back up in this area, I did have this off while we were inspecting the vacuum lines, so if you took it off, put the diverter valve line back on as well as this little connection there, and we're ready to reinsert the air inlet to this carbon box. This is a little bit fragile. All right. Once we get those snugged up, we're ready to put that top cowl panel back in place. Give this thing a quick wipe. Now with this panel, you'll slide this into place up under here. And then in the front, these will clip into the bumper. Careful not to fold them over. And ours is missing a couple of the clips, so it's not really gonna sit as flush as it should, but make sure to line this up with that clip still inside, and it is keyed. Give it a good tug, because it will not stay in place. You may need to pry the clip out slightly. There we go. And let's go ahead and get the car back up in the air and put the last few bumper screws back in the bottom. Two T25s to hold these fender liners into the front of the bumper. One here. All right, and that pretty much takes care of the water pump, thermostat, and changeover valve on this B9 Audi. We'll put the wheels on, torque them to 140 Newton meters, wrap up this belly pan after we're 100% sure that we have no fluid leaks and getting back from our road test. But I hope you guys enjoyed today's video. If so, hit that like button. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, drop down in the comments section below. And don't forget to subscribe, because we'll have plenty more videos on this vehicle and many others like it. My name is Rusty with FCP Euro. Thank you so much for watching. We'll catch you on the next one.